GenFriends. I'm your host, Cheri Hudson Passey from Carolina Girl Genealogy. Tonight, I've got a fabulous panel as we talk about another couple episodes of Finding Your Roots. We've got Mary Kircher Roddy from MKR Genealogy. Hi, Mary.
Hi there. Good to be here. It's been a long time.
It's been a while. So glad to have you. My twin in crime, Hedgecock, from Treasure Chest of Memories. Laura and I just got back from Roots Tech, and Melissa did some wonderful virtual presentations at Roots Tech, and so that was really fun. Anyway, hi, Laura. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. I'm croaky, so I'll try to talk less.
Laura's croaky for one reason. I'm croaky from pollen, so it's going to be a croaky kind of evening, I suppose. And last but not least, we've got Melissa Barker, our archive lady. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, how everybody's doing? Glad to be here. Looking forward to talking to all my Gen friends about these episodes.
Yes. Well, we're going to talk about episodes 7 and 8. And episode 7 had David Duchovny and Richard Kind, and both of their stories had to do with their Jewish ancestry. I thought it was interesting that David Duchovny had said that he never even really related to his Jewish side. He knew it was there, but he was never a practicing Jew. He just knew that on his paternal side that there were Jewish people somewhere on that line, right? So he finds out a lot of information about his Jewish ancestry. And one of those, just as close as his grandfather, was very, very active in the Jewish community in New York. And he had no idea. But then again, he had died when he was little. And, you know, when you don't know somebody, and if people aren't passing down the stories, you just don't know. And so everything that they found for him was a complete shock. Melissa, were you going to say something?
Well, I was just going to add too. I actually just did a presentation, a new presentation this past weekend for the Tennessee Genealogical Society on church records and archives. And, you know, believe it or not, faith is something that a lot of times is not passed down in the family.
Yeah.
My third great grandfather, who lived in Wyandotte County, Ohio, as an early genealogist, I listened to a speaker, and I can't remember who it was, that said you should research your ancestors' church records. And I thought, I wonder. So I contacted the church. This was back in the day where you sent a letter with a stamp and an envelope. And so I sent it to the church, and that letter landed on the desk of the church secretary. And that church secretary, good for me, is that she was a descendant of the same family.
Ah.
And she sent me a packet of information because my ancestor helped to build the original church.
Wow.
He built a wooden pulpit that they still use today. She sent me photographs of that. And my family had no idea. And so that's an aspect of if you don't know what you don't know, because if you don't follow a certain faith like Judaism or whatever it is, you don't know to look for those records. And so this is a great reminder to do that.
Yeah.
I scoured some though for my family and found nothing. And then I found a quote. My grandfather, I don't know, his granddaughter was going to take him to church. He was visiting them in Kansas. And she said, "Which one do you want to go?" And he says, "Oh, it doesn't really matter. One guy wears a white tie, the other guy wears a black tie." And it's like, I don't think religion was very important to him at all.
Really not. That's really funny. That's really funny. Now, some of the records.
Wonder if,
go ahead. Go ahead.
You also wonder, because in David Duchovny's case, you wonder like what was going on between his father and his grandfather. That
maybe
his father didn't.
Yes.
Right, I'm sure there's a story there.
There probably is that we just didn't get to hear.
Well, yeah,
or maybe they didn't know.
Appropriate to share with all of us.
Absolutely, because although we would all like to know, there are some family stories that we don't want shared. And it could just be that they don't even know why that happened, because his grandfather was very, very active in the church. Some of the records that they showed him, one was the petition for citizenship, which I thought was really great for his grandfather. And of course, it showed where they came from. And he was born in Russia. Just all this kind of information, which I think is really wonderful when you can get that, because my family all came too early. There are no naturalization papers. There's no citizenship. They were just all here so early. But these records, if you can find them, just are full of a wealth of information. They'll tell you what port they came from. They'll tell you if they came with other people. They'll tell you birthdays, all sorts of stuff. The later ones will have pictures, which I'm so jealous of when they can find a picture on these records. So I think that's wonderful that he was able to get that. They found out that in 1897, he was actually running a dairy farm. And he was in the Pale of Settlement, which we have heard about before, where the Russians put the Jewish people, and that's where they kind of kept them. They corralled them and kept them there, and they were in really dire circumstances while they were there. And so they decided that they wanted to leave. And, there was a huge number that actually got to leave, and the majority of them came to America. But apparently not his family. No, his family, they were in Egypt. They went to Palestine. They moved round and round, and they really wanted to stay in the Palestine area, but they became part of persecution there and had to leave. They ended up going to Greece, of all places, and then sailing from Greece to America, and only part of the family could come. And they waited for years and years before the mom and the other children could come. And the sad thing is, the mom got here and she only lived just a few months because she ended up getting typhoid and dying. Like, oh my gosh, that was so sad. But they did show him pictures of his grandparents' tombstones, which are really wonderful if you do Jewish genealogy, because they'll be written in Hebrew and it tells them so much information. A lot of them will tell them who they're the children of and where they're from, and all sorts of information. And I think that really touched him. I felt that he was really touched a lot of the different reveals that as he turned the page, he was really tearing up. I think he was really, really getting into it. I'm trying to think of what else that they were able to find for him.
Well, that was the basically the stuff that I had written down.
Uh-huh.
That his grandfather also returned to after his wife died.
Yes, he returned back.
He returned to Palestine, and so one of the I guess it was what was then Palestine, because I'm not sure where the grave is now.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, the picture. Yeah. Well, another story. Go ahead.
What Cheri and I talked about before, the thing that I really liked was, well, first of all, is they were talking about the forced immigration out of Jaffa and into Egypt, like what happened to people. You could tell David Duchovny didn't really even want to hear the story. Like, he got a little impatient. He said, "Are you saying this is what happened to my ancestors?
Right?
Are you saying this is something that happened in that time period?"
Yeah.
And you could really see right then, like, how much he already had started to identify.
Exactly.
And then at the end of it, he said, "I feel like I have a sense of place now." And he said he felt the presence of his ancestors in the room.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was quite moving.
That was very, very touching. But, another story that they found was that, well, I guess we did talk about that when he went back. You were just talking about that. So, and the tombstone. So I think that he was really connecting. He had never connected before with his Jewish roots. And I think it was sinking in, that these were people that, because of them, he is where he is. And he was talking about, I thought maybe we're just lucky. He says, we're not lucky. They made decisions, and the decisions that they made have me living where I am, and my life choices that I can have is because of the life choices that they made. It's not because they were lucky, but it's because of some of the choices that they made to leave and get away. And so you hear that a lot with a lot of people from all different walks of life, that if their ancestors hadn't left certain areas, whether it be because of a war, a Holocaust, whatever it may be, they would not be here. if it wasn't for those decisions and the hard times for their ancestors. And so I appreciated that he made that connection, and he was able to understand that. Go ahead, Laura.
But for so far as what the rest of us could maybe emulate in the research, it was really, really difficult. I mean, it hit some major places in history, but it also went from what is now northern Ukraine, Russia. It went to when Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire.
Yes.
Then it went to Egypt, and then they got to Greece. I mean, the ability of the hobbyists to really find all the research in all those places. That would be quite daunting. That's
a lot of work that was done, and there's something that would take us on our own years and years and years to do. And some of these records are probably in places where they had to have specialists in those areas to go and find it.
And sometimes it's good to pay a professional genealogist.
Exactly. Yeah, to get in there and find those records. Richard Kind, I think we all know him as the character actor on so many shows. So it was fun to have him on here. And he also had paternal grandparents that were from the Pale settlement, which I think is really interesting that they had, the two of them, they had that connection. And so they were finding information for him, and he actually found out that his great-grandfather actually owned a crayon manufacturing store. How do you never hear the story that your great-grandfather made crayons? I mean, how do you never know that? I thought that was so funny, because it's not even that far back in the generations that he never heard that. I thought that was hysterical.
It was not carried forward. It wasn't told. That's why it's important for us to tell the family stories that we know, or the family stories that we dig up as genealogists.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the same great-grandfather, we have a murder mystery, and apparently he was murdered. And so was this great-grandfather's nephew. He was shot at the same time. He was shot. The death certificate says that he was shot in the neck. The nephew was wounded but died later. And they think the partner may have done it. They took him to court because they had taken out life insurance policies.
Follow the money.
Follow the money. But the partner was saying, no, I didn't do it. They were involved in organized crime, and that's who did it. So he got off because they really didn't have any proof that that happened. I thought that was really interesting. And when they asked him, did you ever think that you would have a murder mystery in your family? He said, well, I know other people do, but I would have never guessed what would happen in mine. Because most people just think, my family's just my family. They're kind of boring, and nothing much ever happened. But if we don't pass
nobody has a boring family. No. Nobody has boring ancestors.
No, they're always
they all have a story to tell.
Yeah, you just have to dig around to find it, because they try to cover those ones up.
Now, I want to point out too that Mary you just did a presentation for Legacy, and I cannot remember the name of it, but I think was a really good example of what we're talking about.
That was the Charles Olin one, Flying Under the Radar.
Yes.
I loved it.
Thank you. Deserted the army and changed his name.
Yeah. So cool. So fun. Those are people that are so much fun to research,
Yeah,
they are.
I like the bad guys.
Yeah, too. Yeah. Well, the bad guys leave records, they leave better records. They were able to go back on his paternal side 6 generations, which I thought that was really wonderful that they got to go back that far. They found a passenger list for that family coming over to the United States. They had a photo of the boat. They had the ship's records. They said he was a gold worker. He was 17 when he comes over, a gold worker. I thought that was very interesting. And he came from Prague, is where he left from to come over. And sometimes I think they don't make it clear. Just because they left from Prague doesn't mean that's where they were living. That's just where they caught the boat. Sometimes.
It's like my ancestors, the Barth family, the ones I was talking about, the church that I wrote to Wyandotte County, Ohio. They came over, but they came from Switzerland, but they actually were in Switzerland because they came out of Bern, Germany. religious
Yes.
persecution. They went to Switzerland, and then they came to here from Switzerland. So
Right.
They
And
still had to have gone to a port. I mean, Prague's
Yes.
not a port. So
yeah,
yeah.
right. But I'm just saying sometimes they
yeah.
make it sound like that. And I'm like, wait a second, wait, we need to back up. But they don't have time and they cut
Yeah,
things. I'm like, wait
yeah.
a second, that doesn't make sense. But and I think they're doing a better job of kind of showing records, showing a little bit more records these last few. Sometimes they don't say what they are, and I have to think, what are they using? But this time they did say it was a ship manifest. He had a really fun ancestor named Moises Katz, which I think was interesting. And he was a rabbi, and he couldn't believe. And then he found out there was 2 generations of rabbis in his family, and he just thought that was just very interesting that he would have rabbis. And he says, well, somebody skipped that generation after that. Nobody wanted to, once they came to America, nobody wanted to be a rabbi anymore. He was talking about the Holocaust and how he had never found anybody, and he felt very blessed that nobody in his family that he knew of had suffered in the Holocaust. And of course, when Skip says, turn the page, they're getting ready to show something about what they had just talked about. And I thought, oh dear. So he had an ancestor's brother who actually decided to go back to Russia. And he was picked up and taken in, and excuse me, I cannot remember which camp it was, but he ended up dying in the camp. But he had a son that didn't go to the camp. He escaped and was actually taken care of by a family until the end of the war. They took care of him. They hid him. They fed him. He got a bath once a week, it said. But they took care of him until the end of the war. And he wrote the story of what happened, what was going on, what happened to his family. He wrote the story about the family that took care of him. And I thought, that is a wonderful family legacy to have. And you could just tell that because he learned that this, I think it was like a great great uncle of his and his wife and the other children all died in this camp. It hit him. I do have family members that did not survive and that died. And I think when you find things out like that, it makes history more meaningful. I mean, none of us wants to have that happen in our family. But when it does, it connects us in a way that we've never felt connected before. Mary, did you want to say something?
I was actually just talking to somebody. I was at a meeting last week and about why I do genealogy. And one of the reasons is we read about these historical things like Prohibition or the Industrial Revolution or the Holocaust or whatever. And there are chapters in history books, but nothing more than that. But when you find that personal connection, it really brings that history to life. It
really does. And I think it just makes you appreciate your family and the things that they went through in a way that you never did before. And I think, and you can see for most people when they go through this, and of course they're just finding out, and they're on camera and they're just finding out these things. And I think for a lot of them, they're trying very hard to react in a way that they don't want to be embarrassed about, or they're trying really hard to react in a way that reflects who they want to be, and so that would be difficult to find out some of these really hard things. But I just loved how each of them, just you could tell that they just felt so much more grounded and rooted into their, especially this Jewish line that they really hadn't paid much attention to. They really hadn't thought much about it, and they'd read the stories and they'd heard about all the different things that happened, but now it's a part of their family. This happened to my family. This means something more to me now than it ever did before. So I think that's, like you said, Mary, that's what happens when we start doing our family history, and not just those names and dates, but finding out what was going on around them at the time and what their stories are as much as we can through the records.
It makes history human.
Yes.
The study of genealogy, and then and the story. I mean, when you were saying earlier about David Duchovny and how he connected, and that really is the power of story.
Yes, absolutely. It's the power of story. And I think, and we may see this as we jump to the next, to the next episode. I think sometimes too, when you find out that you've got family on both sides of a problem or both sides of history, it starts making you look at history a little bit different, because you've got family connections on both sides, when before you were only focusing on what you thought was the right side or the wrong side, and now they're both your side. And I think we've seen that a lot in all the seasons, that people have to stand back a little bit and think, oh, these were my people, and they had reasons for doing the things they did, and they had their own stories, and I'm part of those stories. Whether I like that story or not, I am part of that. So let's move on to episode 8, since we're talking about that. We had Angela Davis, who people know a lot about for her efforts in what would we call her? I don't want to say a protester, because that's not
She
what I
called
mean,
her
but
an activist.
an activist. There you go, an activist. And then we've got Jay Johnson, who has been doing a lot with government roles and things like that. So, but let's start with. I want to start with Angela, because Mary has an interesting connection to.
Before Mary starts talking,
Yes,
I just want to
yes.
bring up the fact that one of the things that I think that genealogists need to do, and I'm including myself, because I'm learning this not anew, but even more.
Mhm.
That is, when we read records, I was just telling the group before we came on that when we read the records that we receive about our ancestors, there are some records, let's just say a divorce,
Mhm.
or a court record of some kind, or some other record, let's say even say a pension file. When you read those records, a lot of times you're only getting one side of the story.
Exactly.
And I think that genealogists sometimes, it's not their fault, but sometimes we just take that story hook, line, and sinker and just say, oh, well, this is how it happened.
Uh-huh.
And so I would just encourage genealogists to stop and think about, there's probably more to the story.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not we can document all sides, but I just think we should think about that. And so I just wanted to preface that with, because
there's always another side of a story. A story happens to more than one person. And so we are hearing when we're reading one side, and we're not hearing or reading about the other. So Mary, we wanted Mary to, this is so interesting that Mary has a connection with the beginning, as I talked about Angela Davis's background.
Yeah, Skip talked about Angela's history and something that happened, and he just said at a courthouse in California in 1970. And it was the courthouse where I grew up. And it was in Marin County, California, at the Marin County Courthouse. And there was a trial going on, and weapons were smuggled in to the trial, and people were taken hostage and killed. And the judge who was presiding over the trial was married to my grandmother's cousin, and he was shot and killed on the day. And the district attorney was another relative. He was actually my grandmother's, another one of her cousins' son-in-law. And his spinal cord was severed, and he spent the rest of his life in a wheelchair. Wow. And that story was very, very real to me. I mean, I remember, news accounts when I was a child. I was 10 years old.
Sure. How old were you?
10. And even if it hadn't been, you counting my age there, Laura?
No, I don't know what year it was. You're the one that's good at math, not
me. Even if I hadn't been, if it hadn't impacted my family, it still kind of would have been traumatic, just because the courthouse was a place that, I've been in dozens and dozens of times for various reasons. That's where the Hall of Records, the county library, all sorts of places are, or things are in that same complex. But yeah, it was hard for me. Angela Davis was, she was arrested in New York and then extradited to California and spent, I forget how many months in jail and put on trial. And then, they said in the episode that she was acquitted after, I think, 13 hours of deliberation or whatever. So she ultimately was not found responsible by a jury of her peers.
Exactly.
But that still, it still is a story and an episode that has impacted my family.
Exactly.
Quite intimately.
And I think that's amazing. And it happens so many times, when we've had times before when we're like, oh my gosh, they're at a place where my ancestors lived, where I do research, or I know this story because of this or that. And so I think the more we research and the more we contact people, the more we see how interconnected we all are, whether it's through stories, whether it's through events that happen, or through DNA. We are so much more connected than we think we are. So Mary, that I know that must have been hard to watch that, to be reminded of that story, but I don't think it's you want to call it a coincidence, but that's not really a coincidence. This is a life event that happened to you and happened to her. And so we just wanted to kind of start out with that, because I just thought when you told us that, I thought that was so interesting that you would be so connected to this story in a way that nobody would want to be connected. Yeah.
And I probably watched it from a different angle.
Exactly. Exactly.
And, tried to be as open as I possibly could, but it's still, I'm sure that my past has colored the way I viewed the show.
Exactly. And you know what? All of our past view the way we watch and hear and read anything, our backgrounds shape the way we see the world and the way we see things. And so I just thought that was an interesting thing, and I wanted you to share that. She was acquitted and moved on, and so we're not holding a grudge. That's not what we're saying. We just think that was a very interesting event that happened in your life and in her life, and then you've got that connection there. She specifically came on the show because she wanted to find out who her mother's biological parents were. That was her goal. And I think it's interesting that they tried with DNA, but they could not find anything about her mother, who her mother's mother was. They couldn't find that line. But through DNA, they were able to find out who her father was. And they even had a picture of him. And she was looking at that picture and she said, oh my gosh, the same mouth, that's my mother. And then of course they showed the picture of Sally, her mother, and oh yeah.
It was interesting, that flip, because when she saw the picture of her grandfather, she said, that looks just like my mother. But I don't know, I sensed a different tenor when they showed her the pictures side by side. It's almost like, I don't know, that she could recognize it herself, but then when she was the hard evidence of the two of them being next to each other, I think changed her demeanor. I don't know if anybody else noticed that, but
and I don't know if she was expecting to have been a white man. I mean, I don't know if she was expecting that, and it could have been the shock of that too. When she saw them together, that could have been the issue.
I wonder how many of us, though, when we're in a library or an archive or sitting in front of our computer and we find this piece of information, I wonder if our demeanor changes when we find things.
Because we don't have to get a reveal on camera, right?
No.
We're sitting there in front of our computers or in the library or wherever we may be, and so we don't have anybody watching everything that we do.
Or asked every other minute, how does it make you feel?
How do you feel about that? How do you feel about that? How do you feel about that? I'm like, stop asking them how they feel about that, because I'm sure they don't even know how they feel. And she was interesting because she goes, well, I just learned this information.
She was very honest. She was very honest with her feelings,
Exactly. Because he does constantly say that to, he blows their minds and he says, what do you make of this?
Yeah.
How does that
Yeah.
feel?
I don't know
Yeah.
yet.
So it's just to have someone say, I
Uh,
don't know.
On this, excuse me, on this line, they did find his obituary. So this would be Angela's grandfather. They found his obituary, and he did have, it said that he had 4 sons and 2 daughters. And of course, none of those daughters included her mother, which I'm sure was hurtful. Since we don't know who the biological mom is, we don't know what the relationship was. We have no idea what that may have been. And I'm sure this was not a time period where people were really accepting relationships between people of color and white people or anybody else. I mean, you had to date your own, right? You had to marry your own, and so people were not accepting any of
well, it
that.
was illegal. I mean,
Well, it was illegal. Absolutely,
Yeah,
it was.
yeah,
It was flat out
yeah,
illegal.
yeah,
Absolutely, and so
yeah.
did he? Obviously, she was raised by another couple who adopted her. So, what happened to the mom? We don't know. Why didn't the mom take her and raise her? We don't know. But she said that her mother would be thrilled to know the information, but her mother would cling more to the family that nurtured her and raised her. And I thought, that's probably very true in most cases when you find out who the biologicals are. That's wonderful that those are the biological parents, but your family are the people that raised you and nurtured you. So, so she felt like that's how her mom would have felt, that her mom would have felt that was very interesting, and glad that they found the information. But on the other hand, her family was that family that raised her. Yet her mom wanted to know. So it wasn't that her mom didn't want to know. Her mom really did want to know. They went back further on this man. His name was John Aston Darden. And they went further back on his line to Stephen Darden in 1750 Virginia, and he was a patriot. And so and he played the drums, the pipe and drums. So that's what he did in his unit. And so of course Skip says to him, so that means you've got an ancestor that's a patriot. How does that make you feel?
I know.
And she's like,
she was hit with 2 or 3 things that and asked, how does that make you feel? And what she got hit with, that you could tell she had no idea that was coming, and so she needed some time to process what she was being told. And so
so I'm thinking, I wish Shelley was here tonight, because Shelley's doing a book about these types of things. She's doing the Black Patriots, but I just think she was probably very interested, if she got to watch this, how Angela Davis finds out that she's got an ancestor that was a patriot, and she could, if she wanted to, become a member of the DAR if she wanted to.
Well, she got another organization too that she can join.
It's like, there's more.
There's more.
They went back on her father's line, Frank Davis, and found out that Frank Davis was not a Davis. So we got another DNA problem here where daddy's not the daddy. And it turned out that Frank's mother, Molly, lived next door to a white man. And his name was, Murphy Jones. And it turns out that Murphy Jones,
4 children together.
Yeah, they had lots of children together. And and so they had all these DNA matches, so they knew that Murphy Jones was the real father. So then he even bought Molly some land for $200, and they started to think, oh well, why'd she have to buy it and all that kind of stuff. And he says, Skip goes, wait a minute, perhaps he gave her the money so it all would look legal in court, because probably he couldn't just give her that land. And so he bought it for her, most likely. We don't know for sure, but most likely he bought it for her with his own money, because she wouldn't have had $200. So there's just so many interesting stories in here. They also went to another, well, hang on. Molly's father. They went to Molly's father, and his name was Esom Spencer. And it turns out that after the war, we kind of knew this. We've heard this. A lot of the plantation owners were not so good about understanding that they did not have slaves on their property anymore, and they were very interested in trying to keep the children. And this was happening in this family. And Esom found out that I think it was four of his nephews were being kept on this land as apprentices, they were being called. They were just being kept to work. And so he went to court to try to get their freedom. And of course, what did the judge do? The judge is not going to give them their freedom. They already had their freedom, but to get them out of this apprenticeship. But who came to the rescue? Does anybody remember who came to the rescue and got them off? It was the Freedmen's Bureau. And I thought Bernice would be like,
Yeah.
so how wonderful that they did so many things. And at this point, they went into court and they made sure that those kids were allowed to leave that property and go with their family. And so I thought that was just another fabulous story. And as they're ending, this is kind of when they said, but wait, there's more. And I think this really blew her mind. They went back on the Murphy Jones line. Remember the Murphy Jones guy who was the real daddy? Okay, well, they went back far enough in his line that they discovered that she is a descendant of a Mayflower ancestor. So I think that about blew her mind that she now has a patriot. She has all these other people, and she is descended from the original Mayflower settlers. So not only can she join the DAR now, she can join the Mayflower
Society.
If she really wanted to. But I really do think that a lot of this information just really blew her mind. It's like all I really came on was to see who my mother's parents were. And now you're telling me I've got all these ancestors that I wasn't expecting to find. And I think maybe some of that might have been quite hard for her to wrap her mind around. And I think anytime that we're finding things out that really shock us, it's hard to wrap our minds around it.
It would be really interesting, I think, to listen to her talk about that experience she had on the show today.
I was going to say that. I was going to say that.
Invite her.
Yeah. I would love to hear that too. Yeah.
I think we talked about this in the past, how we wish that the show would go back and talk to these celebrities after the fact and after they've had time to digest what they've learned, talk to their families and see what else they have found. Because
exactly.
I think a lot of these celebrities really got interested in it and maybe have continued the research.
Yeah, probably so. And what other research did they get that didn't make it onto the TV screen? Yeah, because they may have found out even more that maybe they just felt wasn't going to be so sensational to make people gasp, or whatever when they find the information. And so I'm sure there's a lot of things that we don't see or we didn't find out that they all know. But she's another one that said that she's always kind of felt ancestors around her. And that now as she's going through this, she feels them even stronger. And so I thought that was a wonderful statement from her too. Let's move on to Jay Johnson. He knew a lot of his genealogy coming in. So they had done a lot of work. And I think it's funny because a lot of these celebrities will come on like, well, we hired a genealogist. We know all this stuff. What could you possibly find? And they always find something, don't they? They always find something. For his, he had a very, very, very interesting reveal. And that was the fact that he had an ancestor who was a white man who had two families. He had children with his white wife, and he also had children whom he has descended from, children with an enslaved woman at first, and then, well, it was 1870, so she was probably born into slavery. We don't know when they would have gotten married, and I don't know that they made that clear. I don't think he was ever her enslaver. Was he the husband? I don't think so. Although Skip did ask the question, can you love someone who owns you? So maybe
Yeah, I think he was
maybe at one point
the enslaver.
think-
And did they marry?
yeah,
I'm
well,
not-
he lived with
okay.
her as, I don't know that
Okay,
they actually
okay.
married, but
Okay.
they were calling her his wife in the census records. And the interesting thing was, after the war, he was found living with his wife that had been enslaved, and they'd had 10 children. They'd had 10 children together. And he was living with her. And it was interesting because Jay Johnson was, at first, he was really dubious about this. Wait a second. What do you mean? I see him in the census and he's living with her. I mean, you could tell that he was trying to make something else of this at first. I don't think he was convinced that this could be a loving relationship. And of course, we don't know. But when you stay with somebody like that, I mean, he was, and then of course the question that we all laughed at. Anybody else who wants to the question that was asked, Skip?
Can't be on a census twice, can you? And
I yelled at the TV. Yes, you can be more than sometimes 3 times. You heard lots of people that, or sometimes they're just not there, like Laura was saying in her case. Laura, did you want to say something? Uh-oh, you're muted. You're muted. I think it's because you were coughing, so you muted yourself.
Yes. So I thought it was interesting because he had also said that Aaron had willed his land and livestock to both the wives.
Yes.
And then he had ordered, and I wrote down, I don't know why I wrote it down this way. He ordered his white son to build Eliza a house.
Exactly. And Eliza was the African-American.
And what I thought was kind of prophetic was, before all this was revealed, Jay Johnson had said it's the American story, tragedy, hypocrisy. We have to accept the reality of it.
Yeah, and we have, because he didn't want to accept that reality at first. I think that he was really having a hard time. He wanted there to be, he didn't want that relationship to have been a loving relationship. You could tell he just didn't want it to be. It took a while, and Skip was the one that kept saying, look, they had 10 kids together. He didn't have to be living with her. He could have been living with the other woman. He's living with her. He's giving her land. He's got her in the will. He's got the children in the will. You don't do that if you don't love somebody, because he didn't have to at that point. He wasn't trying to give her away to other people as property. She didn't have to be named in the will. And again, this was an illegal situation that they had going on here. But I think it happened a lot, and people just look the other way in a lot of places, small towns. They just accepted it and let it go. Obviously, they did here. They just accepted it and let it go. I did think that one of the questions that Angela asked was, she wanted to know if her white ancestor was part of the KKK. She said, and I bet he was part of the KKK. And Skip's like, we don't know anything about that. We haven't found any records that said that. And so I thought that was a really interesting thing that she wanted to know.
Well, it does make it, that both of them, it makes it clear that a lot of times we look at these records to confirm this narrative that's already in our head.
Yes.
And not that there's anything wrong with the things that either one of them were expecting to find out. I mean, that is a common experience. But sometimes, like one of you said this earlier, you just have to let everything set.
Yeah.
And then you know how you feel.
Exactly.
But I think in this case, Skip was really just not giving them the things they thought they were going to get.
They thought they were going to.
You think you're going to get orange juice and you're drinking a glass of milk, and it's just really funny.
Exactly. I think there was a lot of unexpected situations for all 4 of the celebrities. They were finding things that they didn't think were going to be found. And especially in this episode 8, I really do think there was a lot of things on both of their family trees that were so unexpected and a bit shocking to them. And like we said, I wonder how they feel about it now. I would love to know how they feel about it now. Melissa, I can't hear you.
I hope all of them who are on the series. I hope that they, I don't know, you hope that they catch the genealogy bug, but you hope that they continue exploring. I don't know if the show, this is a question I know we've asked about, after, but I wonder if the show keeps up with them or,
or just goes into production for somebody else. I mean, you just don't know.
The genealogists that work on the show, which I don't know who they are, but you're a genealogist, and if you work with a client, and let's say that your client, the contract or whatever, the work is done. If you're still doing research on something else and you run across something that was this other client, I mean, you're going to grab it. Or if it's something that has grabbed your attention, you're going to do more on it.
Exactly. You're going to go right down that rabbit hole, aren't you? You're just going to jump right down into that rabbit hole.
And so I wonder how much of that has happened.
Well, except if the show, the production is the client, there may be something that the genealogist doesn't have, because I've done a little bit of production.
Yeah, you have.
And it's not, I don't have anything to do with the client, and or the celebrity, whatever.
The celebrity, right. Yeah. So very, very interesting. I think these are all really good stories, and like we said, I think I think it really affected them. And I think we all think about things that we've found with our own families and how they've affected us, and how there are things that are very hard to learn about our families, because as Laura said, we go into this with our own little family narrative, like this is what we're going to find, and it's all going to be sweet and nice, and this is what I'm going to go right up this tree, and I'm going to be a Mayflower. She never expected. I'm not. My people.
She did not expect that.
She did not expect that. She did not expect to find a patriot. He did not expect to find a loving relationship between two people that traditionally would not have had that loving relationship. It would have been a power relationship, And so I think they, Richard Kind was not expecting to find Holocaust victims in his family. And David Duchovny was not expecting to find such a rich history of Jewish lineage in his family history. And so I think,
do you ever notice how some of these celebrities make the comment, they say, where did you find this stuff?
Yeah exactly.
I love it when they say that,
in the records
like, where did you find this stuff?
In the paper trail, as Skip likes to say so much. Laura?
I was thinking with David Duchovny, I don't think he expected to feel that connection.
No, I don't think he did either.
Because also he felt like, or I thought it looked like he felt, I have no idea how he really felt, but a loss of all this time where he didn't realize this was going, and I think
only I'd known.
When we discover something.
Right. We do. We feel that way, don't we? We'll discover something and think, why didn't we know this? And we could have talked to grandma or great grandma or aunt or uncle
or dad or whoever.
Yeah. We all go through that when we discover things about our family and we realize we had them right there and we could have asked the questions, but we didn't know to ask the questions. We didn't know. And sometimes even when we've done interviews with our family, we still find things that we didn't know that they had been through, that they haven't shared, or maybe they didn't know about their parents or grandparents, and we don't have anybody to ask because we didn't know that we needed to ask.
It's amazing to me when you're researching your family history and you find things that are very significant.
Yeah,
absolutely. And then you think, how in the world was this just not told to, it's like you want to figure out when did it stop being told?
Yeah. Where was the break in the chain? When did they hang up the telephone?
Because some of this stuff is so earth-shattering.
Right.
Some of the stuff you find can be so earth-shattering that you're like, how can
Right.
this be left behind? I don't understand that.
Exactly.
But it is. And so then that's why we do what we do.
Yeah, and I know we've said this before. They say it only takes 2 generations for
Yeah.
a story
I
not to
think
be
it takes
shared.
one. I think
Yeah.
it takes
Or-
one.
And there are times when it takes one because we just don't talk about that. So this was really fun. Thank you. And Mary, thank you for sharing your
Yes.
connection
Yeah.
with one of the stories that we're talking about. That's
It
amazing.
makes the story fuller, and it helps us as
Yes.
genealogists and historians to see more than just one side. And I really like that.
Exactly. So
Thank you guys for being so supportive. It was couldn't decide whether I wanted to come on, and I really appreciate your guys' support.
We're glad that you did. I'm glad that all of you come on. I'm glad for all of your support as we record GenFriends and whatever our topic happens to be for that night, whether it's talking about genealogy TV or whatever it happens to be. I appreciate you. I appreciate your questions and your comments and your thoughts about so many different topics that we have dealt with. And we're grateful for those of you that watch. And we would love to hear it if you ever have a connection with one of the stories of the Genealogy TV programs that we talk about. Did you have an ancestor that fought alongside maybe one of the celebrities' ancestors, or do you have a story from the other side? I've often wondered if they're going to mention an enslaver that was my ancestor one of these days as they go through somebody's records and they say, this enslaver of this person. And I go, oh my gosh, that's my ancestor, because I've got several of those being from South Carolina. So you just never know. So we would love to hear it if you have stories that connect with any of these. It would be interesting to hear that side of the story. So with that, thank you so much, ladies, for being here. And we will see you next time on GenFriends. Bye, everybody.
Bye.